Hello everyone, my name is André Lacerda. I'm part of Patria's infrastructure IR team. Welcome to the second episode of our Responsible Investment Talks, our podcast about key trends in the investment market related to the sustainable development of our economy. As we've previously presented in our first episode, when it comes to responsible investing, Patria has three pillars of impact: economic mobility, good governance, and climate change. Within climate change, we see that Latin America has been a front-runner in lower carbon energy generation, with around 70% of its energy coming from renewable sources. Especially in Brazil, this number increases closely to 90%. So today, we'll talk about energy transition. Traditional fossil fuels are still at the core of global power matrix. Energy usage today is still mostly, around 80%, from non-renewable sources. What are the global perspectives for transitioning our world's energy sources to renewables? And how can this become an investment opportunity? To answer this and other questions, we have here today three sector experts. Kanika, Goela, based in our UK office. Frederico Sarmento, Managing Director and Head of the Energy Sector at Patria, based in our São Paulo office. And our special guest, Luciana Costa, Managing Director of Infrastructure, Energy Transition and Climate Change at the Brazilian National Development Bank, BNDES. As you can see, we are in a slightly different scenario today, not at our office. We are in New York at the Nasdaq studio. As most of you are aware, Patria has been a listed company at Nasdaq since 2021 under the ticker PAX. Today, Nasdaq's team has been kind enough to host us at their studio for our podcast. So I want to thank Nasdaq for this opportunity. And of course, I want to thank our guests for joining us today. So to kick off, I want to ask everyone a question for everyone and get everybody on the same page. So let's discuss the net zero goal, an ambitious plan to net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So to begin, Kanika, I want to ask you, the energy sector will play a leading role in this change. Can you explain us why?
Sure, a pleasure to. Andre, so let's start with some numbers, right, to frame the problem. The world in 2024 emitted about 53 billion tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And so if you look at where these emissions came from, 75% of these emissions came from the energy sector. And what do we mean by energy users? It's coming from power generation, it's coming from transportation and heating primarily. As you said, 80% of the world's energy systems are still dependent on fossil fuels. So a key part of the puzzle to achieving this net zero ambition is to transition energy systems away from their dependence on fossil fuels. And how we achieve this is by transitions across multiple sectors. We need the power generation to move to more renewable energy, which, unlike what's in Latin America that you mentioned earlier, is not the case in the rest of the world. But we also need to electrify transportation and we need to electrify heating. So those are the key sources of emissions. And of course, there are other emissions which come from other sectors, but I'm sure we'll talk about that in a subsequent podcast.
So 75% from the energy sector, it's way too much. Fred, do you want to comment on that?
No, just complementing, to reach the net zero goal, it will require a combination of electrification and clean power generation. In other words, if everything runs with electricity as opposed to fossil fuels, and that electricity is produced, for example, from renewable sources, there would be very little emissions, right? And that is why the energy sector is so important in achieving the net zero goals.
Thank you. Luciana, I wanted to ask your perspective about the roles of the DFIs, including BNDES, on providing this transition to the net zero goal. What are the main challenges for the next year? And if you can give us some examples.
Okay, thanks a lot. First, I would like to thank Patria and Nasdaq for hosting us here. Kanika, André, and Fred, it's a pleasure to be here with you. In my opinion, transitioning from fossil fuel to a renewable energy in order to reach net zero, it's a matter of a lot of investments. The great majority of those investments will come from private sector. But DFIs and national development banks like BNDES has a crucial role because we are able to work alongside with the government because we are a policy bank, so we can develop new technologies. We can foster investments into the right direction alongside with the private sector. In my opinion, it is without public and private working together, we are not going to achieve what we need to achieve. And we are talking about a world the world in the past 150 years has been building the energy system based on production, storage, and transportation of molecule. Now we have to build a new system based on electrons and based on new technologies, on batteries. We have a huge, and I fully agree with Frederico, we need to electrify, but we need to use all types of technologies, including ethanol, it's a massive amount of investments in order to do this transition, and DFIs and national development banks can foster and work together with private sector so we can reach net zero earlier and not later.
And Fred, complementing on that, that's the role of the DFIs, and Luciana mentioned that the private sector will have a major role. So how do you think that the private sector, especially asset managers such as Patria, can play a role in this transition? And if you can give us some examples of Patria's impact in infrastructure and then Kanika in private equity.
Yeah, sure. So as Luciana mentioned, the amount of investments that will be required to achieve net zero is just very large. There are some estimates that points to more than $5 trillion every year, right? And so that represents a very large opportunity for private equity and infrastructure funds, right? As a matter of fact, a number of managers have raised large amounts of capital to invest in energy transition teams, right? In Patria, we have invested in renewable generation, both solar, wind, and hydro, for examples. We also have an investment in electric mobility, for example. And we are looking at new technologies such as battery, hydrogen, for example, and biogas as well.
What about you, private equity?
So in private equity, where we focus on in Patria, right, is mid-market buyout private equity. Now, the kind of businesses and business model that private equity likes to invest in are those where you're not taking technological risk. And so these are proven technologies, scalable technologies, what we like to call the picks and shovels of the energy transition. And that typically means companies which are playing along the value chain of energy transition, benefiting from the demand tailwinds, but at the same time, very cash generative businesses, very bankable businesses. So I think I'd like to touch on your point, Luciana, that some of the earlier stage technologies where you have to invest in frontier technologies, that's a space where the private and public sector can come together to fund that, because that's not what's bulk of buyout private equity world. That's not what we are doing. That's not what our investors and our clients have given us the mandate for. So I'll give you the examples in our portfolio. Those companies tend to be services companies. So companies involved in installation of offshore wind or onshore wind or solar farms, or companies involved in the maintenance of such farms. Or you could have software or technology enabled plays. For example, companies which will monitor offshore weather patterns, or the technology used to control your wind farms and solar farms. Or companies where you have a product or IP angle, for example, heat pumps, etc. So those are the kind of businesses and business models we've invested behind.
And I believe that this transition will generate a huge opportunity for all stakeholders from Patria, which are our investors and clients, and from BNDES, from the developers. So I wanted to take your input on what are the opportunities that are going to arise from this transition, and maybe I can start with you.
Yes. I want to pick a point from Kanika. PFIs and national development banks, we can help to scale up new technologies. BNDES, for instance, to put an example, we have done that with solar and wind in Brazil. BNDES was the first bank to finance solar and wind in Brazil, and we support the private sector to scale up those technologies. And we will have to do that with green hydrogen, biomethane, with e-methanol, with SAF, and batteries. So precisely, we can support with de-risking some projects. BNDES has a resilient balance sheet and is able to do that. So that's what I think in terms of examples. We have done that with hydro in Brazil. We have done that with ethanol in Brazil. So it's a 72-year-old bank which has deep knowledge from the local market, deep understanding. We are doing that, for instance, with electromobility. So I think that complementing your point, I fully agree. In the initial phase of the development of new technologies, that's when we have a key role. And we have been also using our balance sheet to mobilize private capital. So when we come and when we invest in a Patria infrastructure fund or private equity, we require Patria to crowding in private capital. So that's something that we have been doing in the past years, and we will increase a lot. And that's crucial for climate, and we'll have to do that with forests, because the cheapest technology to capture carbon is forest. And so those are the type of things that BNDES and DFIs, they have to do.
Yeah, and sure, as an investment manager, we provide our investors ways to have direct exposure to energy transition investments, right? Our flagship strategy in our infrastructure fund is basically to develop projects, meaning we typically enter in a project in an early stage, we develop the project, we secure financing, we secure offtake agreements, we actually build those projects, and once is fully de-risked, we'll divest, and we'll then capture the risk and the value appreciation in doing so. And there are many examples of situations that we did that. We have a company in Brazil called Essentia, for example. We have there 1.7 gigawatts of installed capacity. And there we built one of the largest wind projects in Brazil, financed by BNDES. We built also one of the largest solar projects in Brazil. We are building the largest solar project in Colombia as well. We have an electric mobility company called Evolution Mobility, which provides electric fleet to B2B clients. Just to provide a few examples on what we do in the infrastructure fund.
Yeah, and so what you're describing, Frederico, is very much the value-added infrastructure part of playing the climate theme. I was earlier talking about, the classic buyout private equity, and then, what we touched on is the early stage VC growth opportunities. Now, if you look at actually 2023 to 2024, overall investment in energy transition increased. But if you sort of break down those numbers, the increase happened in the proven, the scalable technologies that we were talking about. But actually, there was a decline between 23 to 24 in clean tech. So that part, especially in the current macroeconomic scenario, I think the role of DFIs and the public-private capital is really important, especially with the regulatory environment in different countries sort of diverging. And of course, that's our job, right? Understanding local differences and then adapting to the risks and opportunities in each geography and each segment accordingly.
Thank you, Kanika. We're coming close to the end of our talk here, but I wanted to ask one final question, and Luciana especially, and if you guys can complement. If you had to point out what is key to achieving great results when investing in energy transition, what would they be?
First, partnership between public and private sector. DFIs and national development banks, we have to crowd in money from private sector. Second, putting in place the right public policy. Brazil has done that with the low carbon fuel law, with green hydrogen law, with the taxonomy that Minister of Finance is putting in place, with Eco-Invest, with a lot of efforts on public policy. Public policy, they have a huge impact. For instance, for this new technology that we have to scale up, if we put in place law like mandates for what, like we have done with ethanol and with diesel in Brazil, our energy mix is 50% renewable because of the scale up of renewable in the power sector, but also because of the mandates that we have imposed on fuels in Brazil. So I think that a combination of the right public policy, partnership between private and public, and having the DFIs and national development banks crowding in money from private sector to the right investments. Because in order to be successful, what will measure that? How we shift from fossil fuel to renewable sources in a fair way. So the price of energy will not increase and impose a huge price on the poorest. So that's the measure of success.
Yeah. No, it's definitely one perspective, a more micro perspective, which is basically returns, right? Which is, we understand that you gotta understand and have people understand the local regulations, because a lot of these investments are very local in terms of regulations and the way of doing business in each country. Even Latin America has quite different regulations and way of doing business. So being local, having local people on the ground with deep knowledge, experience, and know-how, right? That is the way to achieve good results, and of course, the project has to be structured very well. And the execution is extremely important, the type of business we do in our flagship fund, because we do take construction risk, we do take financing risk. So execution experience is extremely important.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I guess disciplined underwriting, as a private capital player, is really important to us. And then, as Fred said, it is really about local knowledge, and I was alluding to that earlier as well. And also sector expertise, because that deep research really does help you understand where the regulatory trends, where the market trends, demand trends are going, and also where in the cycle you are, because sometimes it's very easy to extrapolate growth rates over a long period of time, but we understand that extraordinary growth rates do not continue for a long period of time. And equally, you have to be mindful of what's driving the demand. Is there just a regulatory stroke of the pen risk in some markets? So we really have to understand unit economics, and therefore it is really about backing the right managers with the right sector expertise and the right local knowledge.
Thank you all. That was a very, very insightful conversation. I want to thank everyone for your participation, especially Luciana, our guest here today, and of course for Nasdaq for hosting us. And to access this and other of Patria context, don't forget to follow us on social media and stay tuned for the next episodes of the Responsible Investment Talks. Thank you.